y'all, welcome back to Biblically Blonde. My name's Lacey and I am Biblically Blonde. I do videos about understanding Bible and Bible literacy for the everyday blonde or everyday person. So we're switching it up today and we're going to do a message on Judges 19. So keep watching. Welcome back, y'all. And if you've been following along with me, you know that we're in the study of Judges. And typically when I do a study, I sit down and I tell you what happens, what it tells us about God, why it happened, and how we can apply it in our daily life. But as I neared the end of Judges 19, 20, and 21 are the final chapters in that book. I decided that we needed a message because Judges 19 is that important to me, and I believe it is that important to the arc of the Bible. And it is very much so ignored. But before we get into that, I want to tell you about a woman named Brenda Tracy. Brenda Tracy is a public activist and speaker who oftentimes is talking about how we can respond to acts of sexual violence in this country and around the world, actually. A little bit about her story. She was a young woman in 1998 who attended a get-together at her friend's house. While at that get-together, she was drugged and then gang raped by 4 Oregon State football players. Her attack lasted about 6 hours. At the end of the attack, when she regained consciousness, she went to authorities. She had a rape kit done. And then following that, she did file charges against all 4 of her attackers. Now, that is a very quick summary of what happened to Brenda Tracy, but I in no way want to, put in a few words what happened to her because that is her story to tell. So I am going to list down below a few resources that I found when I came across her story. A couple of videos where she directly speaks because I mentioned she is a public speaker, and then also a few articles that have been written about her where she does interviews in those. So please go check them out. Her story is very, very moving, and you can find more about actually what happened through her voice, which is very, very important. After Brenda Tracy filed charges against those who attacked her that evening, she went through basically kind of this ordeal of where the DA told her she had no case, even though her attackers eventually confessed. They basically told her that nothing could happen. And through the years, her rape kit was actually never tested and eventually thrown away. And all charges were dropped even though these men had confessed. It is later found out that essentially the program at Oregon State, the football program, did not want to deal with such an outrageous storyline that they kept her story hidden and ignored it. Now, what happened to Brenda Tracy is absolutely horrific. And you probably don't need me to tell you that what happened to her is terrible. We all know that it was. And to add to the terribleness of the act that actually happened to her, it was ignored, and she went through many, many plus years of her life feeling as if she did not matter because no one gave her the recognition that she deserved, and no one wanted to fight on her behalf and make the wrong that was done to her right. So like I said below, please go and find out more because there is more to her story where she eventually decides to be an activist and speak out on this. Now, I tell you this story because this story happened in 1998, so this is not very long ago. And while we think that things like this only happen in a terrible world, what if I told you that a story very, very similar to Brenda Tracy's happened in the Old Testament, in the Bible? In our sacred text, there is a gang rape. I bet you weren't expecting to hear that. And my guess is that you didn't even know that this scripture existed. I can tell you that up until a few years ago, I didn't know it existed either. I am a lifelong Christian. Now, I didn't become seriously active in my faith until my late 20s, but I did grow up in a household where we did attend church and faith was important. And never in my 28 years of life have I ever heard a pastor get up on a Sunday morning and talk about Judges 19 through 21. It is never mentioned. And it has never been mentioned. The very, very, very few sermons that I have heard about Judges 19 through 21 were after I sought them out and started Googling and started looking about resources so I could fully understand this text. If you are just mindlessly reading the Bible and you come across Judges 19 through 21, your mind is going to explode because you're not going to understand it. Because how could something so vile and disgusting and terrible happen in the Bible? How could something that is so terrible happen in a book that is so supposed to be sacred? And the answer lies in the few verses above. Now, I am going to go into what happens, but I want to talk about right here the importance of not ignoring the scripture. And that is why I chose to make this video here and talk about this. Nobody talks about it. Much like how nobody talked about Brenda Tracy, much like everyone just ignored what happened to her, and much like people ignore what happens to victims of assault every single day, men or women. It is ignored and swept on the rug. This woman in Judges 19 isn't even given a name. And many a times for centuries, no one acknowledges her. I can tell you the story of David and Goliath. I can tell you the story of Samson and Delilah. I can tell you the story of the woman at the well. I can tell you so many well-known Bible stories, but I could not tell you about Judges 19. And up until a few years ago, I couldn't even tell you that I knew it existed. And so I reach out to you saying, even if you did know about this scripture, do you really know about it? Do you really know the purpose of this scripture? See, God tells us that all scripture is breathed out and divine, meaning that this piece of literature is just as divine in a different way as the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Now, hear me out. They're not on equal playing fields, but this scripture is important because it shows us the reason for that resurrection. If we don't have reasons for it, it is meaningless. And so this scripture here speaks to us more than what many other pieces of scripture I think does. Now, all of it is equal, and so I'm not pivoting one against the other, but I'm saying that we should not ignore it anymore. When I was doing research for this topic, I came across a couple commentaries, and this just angered me so much that I wanted to just drop everything and scream. And the commentary was by F.B. Meyer. And it says, it's the commentary that he has immediately after the first line of scripture in Judges 19, which says, in those days, Israel had no king. He then says, it would be sufficient to ponder these words, which occur 4 times in the book, without reading further in this terrible chapter, which shows the depths of the depravity to which may sink apart from the grace of God. Now that's a heavy, heavy quote right there. And I know when I say it in spurs like that, you're like, what did he say? What this man is saying is that we should not even read it. That we should read line 1 of chapter 19 and move on to the next book. Not even finish out Judges, not even read what happens, because it is that bad. And yes, it is bad. But no, we are not going to turn the page. No, we are not going to look at the next chapter or the next book. We are going to address it and we are going to talk about it because it is not going to be ignored. This poor woman doesn't even have a name. Alrighty, so now that I've talked about the importance of not ignoring this scripture, I have to tell y'all what actually happens in this scripture. And I'm not going to go through verse by verse, but there are a few verses that I want to talk about. So, like I said, the first line is Israel had no king. In those days, Israel had no king. So we are in the time of Judges. This line is repeated in every chapter of Judges. It is made clear to us we are living in a time where God is not reigning and people are doing what is right in their own eyes. We're setting the storyline up here. We learn about a young woman who is living as a concubine in Judea. And a concubine essentially is a lesser wife. She is not even given authority as this person's wife. She is just kind of there. She's lesser than. So her dignity has already been taken from her as a concubine. We learn in scripture that she has gone back to live with her father and tried to escape from her husband. Now, if you just read scripture, it says the word unfaithful, but if you dig a little deeper into translation, we learn that she left breaking the bonds of that marriage because of the fact that she was in an abusive relationship and her husband did not treat her very well. And so here we already set the stage up for a woman who has not been taken care of and has not been looked after as like God has put upon the men in her family to look after her. She has sought refuge in her father's household away from this man. And this man comes back after 4 months to get her, because it took them 4 months to even care to get this young woman. Her father gives her back to the husband, and they make their journey back to where he is staying. On their way back, it becomes nighttime, and they decide that they should seek refuge. And instead of seeking refuge in the first town they come to, he decides that they're going to go on until the next town, because that is a Hebrew town, that is a Israelite town, and that they are going to be more accepted and taken care of there. It tells us in verse 12, his master replied, "No, we won't go into any city whose people are not Israelites. We will go on to Gibeah." He added, "Come on, let's try to reach Gibeah or Ramon and spend the night in one of those places." So we learn that they go to this town of Gibeah, and while they are there, they find refuge or a house to stay at, essentially a kind of Airbnb for the night. And while they are there, it tells us that a group of wicked men come to the door. And here's where things start getting terrible. Verse 22. While they were enjoying themselves, some of the wicked men of the city surrounded the house, pounding on the door. They shouted to the old man who owned the house, "Bring out the man who came to your house so we can have sex with him." Verse 23. The owner of the house went outside and said to them, "No, my friends, don't be so vile. Since this man is my guest, don't do this outrageous thing. Look, here is my virgin daughter and his concubine. I will bring them out to you now, and you can use them and do to them whatever you wish. But as for this man, don't do such an outrageous thing." So what's going on in this scripture so far? A group of wicked men have come to the door and demanded that they gang rape the man. And the man says, "No, do not do such a vile thing. Instead, I will give you my daughter and his concubine, this woman who hasn't even been named. And you can do to them as you wanted to do to this man." Verse 25 says, "But the men would not listen to them. So the man took his concubine and sent her outside to them, and they raped her and abused her throughout the night, and at dawn they let her go. At daybreak, the woman went back to the house where her master was staying, fell down at the door, and lay there until daylight." Verse 27. When her master got up in the morning and opened the door of the house and stepped out to continue on his way, there lay his concubine. Fallen on the doorway of the house with her hands on the threshold, he said to her, "Get up, let's go." But there was no answer. Then the man put her on his donkey and set out for home. Verse 29. When he reached home, he took a knife and cut up his concubine, limb by limb, into 12 parts, and sent them into all areas of Israel. Everyone saw who it was, saying to one another, "Such a thing has never been seen or done, not since the day the Israelites came out of Egypt." So I read you the scripture, but in summary what happens is the woman is thrown out unwillingly, and she is gang raped for hours by these men. These Israelite men, these sons of Abraham, are gang raping this woman for hours, to the point that when the daylight comes, she has no energy to get up on the threshold and seek refuge out from her abusive husband. And her husband is such a low-life scum that he doesn't even treat to her. Instead, he allows her to die, and then he cuts up her body and sends her into 12 parts of Israel. Now, I don't have to tell you that Judges 19 is bad. We as human beings know that Judges 19 is bad. We know that what happened to this woman is bad. I don't have to write a sermon or speak a message to tell you that. In fact, it's redundant that I'm even doing it. Obviously, it's bad. What I'm talking to you here about is why and how we can respond to it. So what happened to this woman is in scripture for a reason, and it's not to tell us that it's bad. Deuteronomy 22, 25 through 27 tells us that rape is bad. It lays it out in the law for us. It is on par with murder, and the victim is blameless. See, we have a God that does not shy away from sexual violence. And in fact, he attacks it and he hates it. He does not ignore it, wipe it under the rug, and act like it doesn't happen. God hates sexual violence, and he hates what happened to this woman. And I'm a firm believer that when this was happening, he was weeping. This is not in scripture to tell us it was bad. It is in scripture to tell us our need for a king. If we go back into the first section, it tells us that Israel had no king and they did what was right in our own eyes. And so when we hear stories like Judges 19 or the story of Brenda Tracy or thousands of other men and women who are sexually violated every day, we wonder to ourselves, how could this happen in a world with God? And the answer, it is not happening in a world with God. It is happening in a world where people do not serve any God and they do what is right in their own eyes. So if I ended this message here today just telling you that we need to serve God and not serve ourselves, it would be pretty obvious, right? And yeah, that's totally true. We need to serve God and do what is right in His eyes. But let's dig a little deeper here. Let's look to the true and better King for ways that we can respond to this. Because the problem is not that this is wrong. We know it is wrong. The problem is how we as Christians for centuries have responded to this. Why is this not talked about? It is not talked about because no one wants to address sin for what sin is. And so this horrific incident that we do not give justice to, that we ignore, that I've never heard talked about on Sunday morning, we act like it never happened. When if we actually looked at it and saw the need for a king and saw the need for justice, it could radically change the way that we interact with each other, and it could radically change sexual violence in this country. If we look to the true and better King who is Jesus Christ, we would see a father and a brother and a son and everything. Jesus Christ is everything. It tells us He is the Word at the beginning. We would see someone who treats women on an equal playing field, who loves women, who respects women, who would have mourned this woman and who would weep at her side and who would stand up for her. We see in Scripture that Jesus actually calls women the daughter of Abraham. Now, if you're not versed up on Bible literature, let me tell you that this is huge. Abraham was going to be God's descendant. He is the father of all of us. So from God, He created Abraham, and then Abraham, everyone else. So to be a son of Abraham meant that you are a son of God. And yet we actually have Jesus Christ, the Nazareth, living and breathing on earth, telling a woman that she is a daughter of Abraham. She is a daughter of God. She is equal. She is not to be thrown out. She is not to say, oh, don't do that to me, but do that to my wife. No, she is equal to us, and she is to be defended. She is to be believed, and she is to be brought to justice for what happened to her. And let me tell you, without this piece of Scripture of Judges 19, maybe we wouldn't understand the resurrection as much. Because why do we need a resurrection? We need it because of stories like this. Because unfortunately, this isn't the first time this happens. This happens in 1998 with Brenda Tracy, and this happens 1,000 times more every day to other women and men. Sexual violence is prevalent in our culture and in the world, and it has not stopped in the time of Judges until the time of now, and it will not stop. So yes, we need a resurrection. We ask ourselves, what kind of world does this happen in? And this happens in a world where we do not have a God and we do what is right in our own eyes. So I challenge you to quit ignoring the hard Scripture. Quit ignoring Judges 19 through 21. Acknowledge it. Look at it. Do not do as this commentary says. Do not quit looking at it. No, read the words of what happens to this woman and acknowledge her pain. This woman cried out and no one helped her. We will help her now, and we will help every single woman. If we are living in God's eyes, we are standing up for the weak. We are standing up for those who cannot stand up for themselves. Yes, what happened to her was wrong, but the way that we have responded to it through the church is even worse. We should not be hearing about this for the first time at the age of 28, or however old you are. We should be learning about this. We should have our men, our pastors actually teaching us the importance of this Scripture. As I close, I just want to encourage y'all to read. And I want to give a moment to this woman who unfortunately isn't even named. But we've done a really good job in the centuries afterwards of completely just ignoring her and making her invisible. And so today, I say she is no longer invisible, and we are going to shine light on her. And God is with her. God is with you, He is with me, and He is with her. And so I just want to take a moment of silence and remember her. All right, y'all, so that was the first message style that I've ever done on my channel, but I really felt that I needed to talk about it. I know I may have been a little all over the place. I am definitely not trained to do messages, but I am trying my best. So I will see you in the next video. I love y'all, I cherish you, and I just tell y'all to seek the true and better King, because we can make this world a whole lot better if we do what is right in God's eyes and not in our own.